Have you ever wondered why the most magnetic women are often the ones who say the least? The ones who carry themselves not with noise, not with explanations, but with an aura so unshakable that silence itself becomes their shield and their crown. In a world where many rush to justify, defend, and prove, there exists a woman who never explains herself. And that, paradoxically, is where her greatest power resides. She is not loud, but her presence reverberates. She is not eager to correct misconceptions, for she understands that those who misunderstand her are not her burden to carry. Jung would say she has withdrawn her projections. She no longer pleads to be seen through the eyes of another because she has begun to see herself clearly. Imagine that, a woman who stands so firm in her own inner knowing that external validation dissolves like mist before the sun. This woman terrifies some men. Why? Because silence, when held with dignity, exposes them. Her refusal to explain is not arrogance, it is mastery. It reveals the insecurity of those who demand her compliance. A man expects the chase, the apology, the justification. He expects her to make herself small, digestible, and clear. But she does not bend. Her silence whispers, "I am not here to be consumed, I am here to exist." And in that moment, the man faces his own shadow, because her quiet becomes the mirror of his own lack. You've seen it, perhaps even felt it. That unnerving moment when someone looks at you, says nothing, and you cannot read them. It unsettles you, because the human ego craves control through certainty. When a woman declines to explain herself, she removes that certainty. She lets others drown in their projections, never rescuing them with explanations. Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow, the raw discomfort of realizing the judgments you cast are reflections of yourself. And you, watching this now, perhaps you've been trained to think silence is weakness, that if you do not defend yourself, you will be erased. But ask yourself, what if the opposite is true? What if silence is the strongest form of presence? Consider the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. To a woman in her sovereignty, the best answer is not to justify, not to plead, but simply to remain. For only what is fragile must shout to prove it exists. What is unshakable has no need for noise. Psychology reveals that the compulsion to over-explain is often rooted in trauma. A child who once felt unseen, misunderstood, or falsely accused grows into an adult who desperately clarifies every word, every action, fearing abandonment if she does not. But there comes a turning point. Individuation, as Jung framed it. When a woman breaks that chain, she awakens to the truth that not everyone is meant to understand her, nor should they. Some were only ever meant to misunderstand, so that she could finally liberate herself from the cage of needing approval. Notice how men react to her. Some feel threatened, others irresistibly drawn. Because her silence is not emptiness, it is mystery. And mystery is the highest form of attraction. When she withholds explanations, she withholds her energy, her time, her essence. This refusal transforms her into the archetype of the sovereign. She is not conquered, she is chosen, and she chooses. She becomes a force beyond control. And this unsettles the fragile masculine ego. For when a man encounters a woman who does not explain herself, he cannot use her words against her, cannot entangle her in his logic. He is left only with her presence and his own reflection in it. Some men crumble before this, others rise. For such silence invites them, too, into their own individuation, to stop demanding, to start seeing. Think about the women you know who explain themselves endlessly. Compare them to the ones who remain calm, unbothered, untouchable. Which ones radiate power? Which ones do men remember? Jung would say the second embodies her anima fully integrated, no longer begging to be validated by the masculine gaze. She has become whole unto herself, and so she no longer explains. And you, if you've ever felt the exhaustion of over-explaining, notice the chains you place on yourself when you do so. Every explanation is a rope tying you back to the perception of another. Every silence is a cut of that rope, a reclaiming of your soul. What you think is cruelty or coldness is in truth liberation. The power of a woman who never explains herself is not about shutting out the world. It is about finally belonging to herself. This is why silence is magnetic. It is the language of the self-possessed. It is not passive, but active. A stance, a boundary, a declaration. I will not dilute my essence for your comfort. And in that declaration, the world shifts. For the woman who never explains herself teaches all who encounter her the deepest psychological truth. Your projection of me is not my responsibility. There is a weight that falls off her shoulders the moment she realizes she no longer owes the world an explanation. It is the weight of centuries of conditioning, of being told to be agreeable, to soften the edges of her truth so that no one feels threatened by her. In Jungian terms, it is the breaking of the collective complex, the invisible pattern that demands women be interpreters of their own existence, constantly offering translation for their emotions, their choices, their very being. When she refuses to explain, she is refusing to carry the collective wound of obedience any longer. This silence is not empty space. It is a presence carved out by discipline, by boundaries that stand like stone pillars. She is not cold, she is rooted. And what happens when a tree grows? Roots deep enough to withstand storms. The winds rage, accusations fly, misinterpretations swirl. But she does not fall. To those who seek control, this stability feels like defiance. To those who seek truth, it feels like freedom. You have seen how the ego reacts when denied an explanation. It scrambles, it demands, it projects. The person who wants her to explain is really saying, "Make me comfortable. Align your truth with my version of reality so I don't have to confront my own distortion." But she denies them this comfort. And in that denial, she calls them into their shadow, into the raw encounter with their unacknowledged fears and desires. Her silence is not cruelty. It is initiation. Carl Jung taught that individuation requires confrontation with the shadow, that the path to wholeness is not an endless justification, but an embracing contradiction. A woman who refuses to explain is a woman who embodies this principle. She lets others wrestle with their projections instead of absorbing them. She leaves them alone with their reflection, like Narcissus before the water. Some may despise her for this. Others, if they are brave, may grow. Her refusal to explain is also an act of sovereignty over her energy. Explanations demand energy, and energy is life. Every time you explain, you hand over fragments of yourself in the hope of being understood. But she understands that her essence is too precious to be given away to anyone who demands it without reverence. In withholding explanation, she keeps her energy intact, circulating inward, building a force that others feel even in her silence. And men, especially, find this both infuriating and irresistible. For men are conditioned to believe they hold the role of judge, that women must bring their hearts to court and await a verdict. Yet, when she does not even show up for trial, when she refuses to plead her case, she strips him of his false power. He cannot condemn what does not ask for absolution. He cannot control what does not kneel before his authority. Her silence dethrones him, not by confrontation, but by absence. Do you see the paradox? By saying nothing, she says everything. By explaining nothing, she reveals everything about her strength. This is why her silence draws the gaze, why her presence lingers long after she has left the room. It is not mystery for mystery's sake. It is mystery born of wholeness. Jung once noted that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off parts of ourselves, but by embracing them. Her silence is not suppression, but integration. She has integrated her need to be understood, her fear of rejection, her compulsion to please, and by integrating them, she has transcended them. And here's the challenge for you. Can you bear to let others misunderstand you? Can you survive the discomfort of not defending yourself? Can you live with being misread, even vilified, without feeling the urge to run back and explain? For the woman who never explains herself does not achieve this power without fire. She endures the sting of gossip, the sharpness of misinterpretation, the ache of distance. Yet she survives it all. And in that survival, she discovers that her worth was never held by their approval. Her silence is not a wall, but a mirror. Every man who meets her sees himself reflected in it. The insecure will call her cold. The possessive will call her arrogant. The wise will call her sovereign. She has become an archetype, a living embodiment of the anima that no longer begs the animus for definition. She is the high priestess of her own life, and her refusal to explain is her veil, not to hide her weakness, but to protect her sacredness. And perhaps you have already felt the stirring of this within yourself, that longing to no longer explain why you chose, why you left, why you stayed, why you dreamed bigger than others allowed you, the longing to simply be, without footnotes, without apologies, without shrinking. That is the beginning of your individuation, the moment you hear the whisper, "You are enough without explanation." For in the end, explanation is a form of begging. Silence is a form of mastery. And once you taste the mastery, you will never again trade it for scraps of validation. What unnerves the world about the woman who never explains herself is that she no longer participates in its games of control. She has slipped through the net of expectation. People try to pin her down with assumptions, but she does not waste time correcting them. They try to provoke her into defending, but she does not play their script. She simply exists, untouchable. In this way, she becomes a paradox in motion. She is both fully visible and completely beyond reach. In Jungian language, she has withdrawn her anima projection from the collective stage. She no longer allows herself to be cast as the good girl, the dutiful daughter, the patient lover, the apologetic friend. These masks, once glued to her, now lie shattered on the floor. And when others approach, hoping to see her in one of those roles, they are disarmed by her refusal to play along. This is why her silence is unsettling. It forces others to realize the performance is over. You have probably witnessed this dynamic, perhaps in yourself, perhaps in someone else. The moment a woman refuses to explain, she introduces an entirely new frequency into the interaction. Suddenly, the man who thought he could dominate with words finds himself without a weapon. He expected an argument. He finds stillness. He expected tears. He finds composure. He expected persuasion. He finds distance. And in that gap, he is forced to confront his own impotence. This is where her power crystallizes. Her silence is not passive resistance, it is active sovereignty. Like the Stoic philosophers who believed that power lies in mastering one's reaction, she understands that she owes no performance to the outer world. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free." The brave woman is free precisely because she does not kneel before the court of explanation. There is another layer, though, one most people never see. Silence is also her method of protection. To explain is to hand over pieces of the self, to expose vulnerabilities to those who may twist or misuse them. But she has learned that not everyone deserves access to her inner world. She guards her truth not out of fear, but out of wisdom. She knows that what is sacred must be veiled, not because it is weak, but because it is powerful. The high priestess archetype in Jung's symbolic framework embodies this, the keeper of hidden knowledge, the one who reveals only when the seeker is ready. And so, when she does not explain, She is not closing herself. She is discerning. She is silently asking, "Are you worthy of knowing me?" And most are not. Only those who approach with humility, patience, and depth are allowed through her silence into her truth. For silence is not absence of voice, it is the most refined filter of all. This truth unsettles men particularly. For many men, a woman's silence cannot be tolerated. It activates their primal fear of the unknown. A silent woman becomes a mirror in which they see their own inadequacy reflected. Without her words to anchor them, they spiral into their own chaos. The weak man will interpret her silence as rejection, arrogance, or cruelty. The strong man, however, will recognize it as a challenge to rise into his own wholeness, to meet her at her level of sovereignty rather than drag her into his insecurities. Have you noticed how silence alters the atmosphere of a room? A single woman, calm and unapologetic, can shift the entire dynamic simply by refusing to engage in the noise. Others may gossip, accuse, explain, rationalize, but she sits, listens, observes, offering nothing. Suddenly, the noise reveals itself as weakness. Suddenly, the one who says nothing becomes the most powerful presence of all. But this silence comes at a cost. To embody it, a woman must first confront the ghosts that whisper within her, the inner critic that says, "If you don't explain, they'll abandon you. If you don't justify, they'll destroy you." This inner voice is not hers. It is the echo of old wounds, childhood conditioning, ancestral fear. To refuse explanation is not only to silence the outer world, but also to silence this internal accuser. It is shadow work in its purest form. Facing the fear of abandonment, the terror of rejection, and walking through it until one discovers that the world does not end when you stop explaining. And once she survives this confrontation, she becomes untouchable. For how do you control someone who is no longer afraid of being misunderstood? How do you manipulate a woman who refuses to defend herself? You can't. She is free. She belongs not to the narratives imposed on her, but to herself. This is why the silent woman is unforgettable. She lingers in the mind because she never surrendered her essence. Men recall her not because she pleaded to be remembered, but because she never explained herself into forgettability. Silence is the echo that endures when words have faded. And perhaps you sense this truth rising within you too. Perhaps you are tired of explaining why you choose as you do, why you dream as you dream, why you refuse to shrink into the roles offered to you. That exhaustion is not weakness. It is the threshold to becoming the woman whose silence is her power, whose presence needs no defense. There is something almost mythic about the woman who no longer explains. She stands like an archetype carved from stone, yet she breathes with the softness of flesh. Her silence is not emptiness, but a language spoken in a frequency few dare to hear. She has learned what Jung insisted upon, that the soul becomes luminous only when it withdraws from the desperate clamor of the crowd and listens to its own depths. Her refusal to explain is the act of withdrawing into herself, of honoring the inner voice above the outer noise. Explanations are chains, subtle but heavy. They bind the soul to another's approval. Each justification is a thread spun outward, tethering the woman to the perceptions of those who may never truly see her. But when she cuts those threads, something astonishing happens. Her presence becomes whole, intact, indivisible. It is then that she embodies the archetype of the self, the Jungian center where all contradictions reconcile. She is no longer scattered across other people's judgments. She stands gathered, one, and the world notices. Noticing is unavoidable because energy never lies. The woman who does not explain herself carries a different vibration, one that disrupts patterns. Those who thrive on manipulation will circle her, trying every tactic to draw her into justification. Anger, guilt, seduction, even pity. yet none succeed. She smiles, perhaps, or simply remains still, and their weapons crumble against her silence. This is the kind of strength Marcus Aurelius called invincible, the strength that lies not in dominating others, but in refusing to be dominated by them. For some, her silence becomes unbearable. It leaves them exposed, because explanation is the bridge they rely on to project their insecurities. Without her words, they cannot cross over. They are left drowning in their own confusion. And this is the secret: her silence does not injure them. It simply reveals them. What they experience as rejection is really confrontation with themselves. Jung called this enantiodromia, the swinging of opposites, the inevitable moment when denial turns into exposure. She holds the mirror but never explains the reflection. You may be tempted to ask, is this not cruelty? Is silence not a weapon? No, silence is not weaponry, it is sovereignty. A weapon wounds. Sovereignty liberates. By refusing to explain, she is not attacking anyone. She is reclaiming her right to exist without justification. She is, in fact, freeing others as well, freeing them from the illusion that they can control her with their interpretations. This is why her silence feels so magnetic, so unforgettable. It is the paradox of restraint. The less she offers, the more they crave. And yet, she is not playing a game. She does not withhold to manipulate. She withholds because her truth no longer requires validation. In Jungian psychology, this is the mark of individuation complete, when one no longer bends the soul into palatable shapes for the collective, but allows it to stand in its raw, unfiltered form. Have you felt the exhaustion of constantly clarifying yourself? Have you noticed the futility of trying to make everyone understand your heart? The woman who no longer explains has already walked through that exhaustion. She has discovered the futility. She has reached the point of collapse, only to find that beyond collapse lies clarity, the realization that understanding is not owed, nor guaranteed, nor even necessary. And it is here that her feminine energy transforms. She is no longer the pleaser, no longer the peacemaker, no longer the child seeking safety and approval. She becomes the sovereign feminine, not against men, not against the world, but for herself. She embodies the anima fully realized, no longer projecting her need for recognition onto the masculine. She simply radiates. And those who encounter her either recoil in fear or bow in reverence, because something in them recognizes the ancient truth she carries, the truth of a soul that belongs to no one but itself. Imagine being in her presence. Words would feel clumsy. Explanations would feel unnecessary. Her very existence commands stillness. She is not loud, not dramatic, not seeking to prove, yet every gesture, every silence, every refusal to explain becomes an act of authority. You leave her presence not with answers but with questions about yourself. That is her silent gift. She awakens the unconscious in those who meet her. And you, if you are listening closely, can already sense the invitation. To step into this archetype is to step into a different rhythm of being. To stop running after validation. To stop handing over your essence every time someone demands a reason. To stop trading your energy for temporary peace. The woman who never explains herself has chosen a different path. The path of inner peace, inner sovereignty, inner wholeness. She has become, in essence, untouchable. Not because she hides, but because she no longer offers herself on the altar of misunderstanding. This is the power that silence gives. This is the freedom that arises when you no longer feel the compulsion to be understood. Silence, when carried with dignity, becomes more eloquent than 1,000 explanations. It is not the absence of voice, but the presence of mastery. The woman who no longer explains herself embodies a paradox that unsettles the ego. She is both transparent and unfathomable. One can see her, yet not grasp her. One can touch her presence, yet not contain her essence. Jung would call this the emergence of the self, that rare moment when the fragmented pieces of identity coalesce into something indivisible, something beyond the reach of others' narratives. What happens when she refuses to explain? The projections collapse. Every accusation hurled at her, every assumption whispered about her, lands in the empty space between her and the world. She does not pick it up, does not wear it, does not make it her own. And so, the projection does not stick. It returns to its sender, forcing them to confront what was truly theirs all along. Her silence becomes alchemical, a process of transmutation in which lies reveal themselves, and truth emerges without her ever speaking. Men, in particular, find themselves disarmed by this, for many have been conditioned to equate power with verbal dominance, to believe that if they can argue harder, longer, louder, they will win. But what happens when their opponent never enters the argument at all? When the woman does not debate, does not justify, does not even resist, they are left arguing with themselves. Her silence transforms the battlefield into a mirror, and they are forced to wrestle not with her, but with their own emptiness. And here lies the deep psychology. The compulsion to explain is rooted in fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of being abandoned, fear of being misunderstood. When a woman steps beyond that fear, she achieves a level of liberation most never touch. Epictetus taught that we are disturbed not by events, but by our interpretations of them. The woman who does not explain herself has learned this truth. She no longer fears the interpretations of others because she knows they reveal more about the interpreter than about her. Perhaps you too have felt the prison of over-explaining. You wanted to be liked, so you softened your words. You wanted to be safe, so you justified your choices. You wanted to be loved, so you bent yourself into clarity for someone who would never truly see you anyway. And every time you did, you shrank. Every time you handed over a fragment of yourself. The woman who no longer explains has walked that road. And she chose to stop walking. She chose to stand still in her own truth, whether or not anyone followed. The silence she carries is not coldness, but fire. A quiet, slow-burning fire that consumes the need for external validation. She does not shut others out to punish them. She simply refuses to abandon herself for their comfort. Her silence says, "You may think what you will, but I remain." And in that stance, she becomes ungovernable. What does this do to her relationships? It transforms them. She no longer attracts those who need to control her, for they cannot survive in her presence. Instead, she draws those who can respect mystery, those who can sit in the discomfort of not always knowing, those who can love her without demanding constant explanation. This is rare, and it is powerful. It is what Jung meant when he spoke of conscious relationships, where two individuals meet as whole beings, not as fragments seeking completion. But there is something even deeper here. Her silence is also a form of compassion, for when she refuses to explain, she denies others the false comfort of their projections. She does not soothe them with excuses or shield them from themselves. She lets them confront their own shadows, their own distortions. It may sting, it may hurt, but it is real. And sometimes it is only in the silence of another that one finally hears, the noise of one's own ego. And you, if you are brave, will begin to practice this. The next time you are misunderstood, resist the urge to correct. The next time you are misjudged, resist the urge to defend. The next time someone demands your explanation, breathe and give them none. Watch how the energy shifts. Watch how the power dynamics reverse. You will feel the discomfort at first, the rising panic of, what if they think badly of me? But then you will realize they already think what they want. Your words will not save you. Your silence, however, might. This is why the woman who never explains herself cannot be forgotten. She leaves an imprint not through noise, but through absence. Through what she does not say, she forces the world to face itself. And in that mirror, something stirs. Some recoil, some awaken, but no one remains untouched. The journey ends not in silence for silence's sake, but in the peace it brings. For once you know you need explain nothing. You are free. Free from the chains of perception. Free from the prison of approval. Free to stand whole in your being. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.